The reading is taken from Genesis chapter 12, verses 10 to 20. Abram in Egypt. Now there was a famine in the land, and Abram went down to Egypt to live there for a while, because the famine was severe. As he was about to enter Egypt, he said to his wife Sarah, "I know what a beautiful woman you are. When the Egyptians see you, they will say, 'This is his wife,' and then they will kill me, but they'll let you live. Say you are my sister, so that I will be treated well for your sake, and my life will be spared because of you." When Abram came to Egypt, the Egyptians saw that Sarah was a very beautiful woman. And when Pharaoh's officials saw her, they praised her to Pharaoh, and she was taken into his palace. He treated Abram well for her sake, and Abram acquired sheep and cattle, male and female donkeys, male and female servants, and camels. But the Lord inflicted serious diseases on Pharaoh and his household because of Abram's wife Sarah. So Pharaoh summoned Abram. "What have you done to me?" he said. "Why didn't you tell me that she was your wife? Why did you say, 'She is my sister,' so that I took her to be my wife? Now then, here is your wife. Take her and go." Then Pharaoh gave orders about Abram to his men, and they sent him on his way with his wife and everything that he had. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. I'm going to pray now for Naomi. Father, I just thank you for bringing Naomi safely back to us. And Lord, I also pray that you inspire her with your power of your Holy Spirit, that as she speaks out your word, that it will bless all of us and that we will hear it and understand it. In the name of Jesus, amen.
Amen. Thank you. Oh, brilliant. Thank you. First of all, it's so lovely to be back. It's always lovely to be back in England when I get back from South Sudan. But also, you are an amazing church. And every time I come back, I think, I am so blessed to have you as my family. So thank you for being my family, and thank you for those of you who prayed when I was away. So I'm going to start with a question. And the question is, what is God's call on your life? Who did he call you to bless? We just sang, "Lead me in your love to those around me." Who is he leading you to? Who has he led you to? What is your call? But also, what troubles have found you on the way? Maybe that call came recently, maybe it came years ago. There was a great testimony by Philippa Nash a few weeks ago, talking about how her teacher prompted her to think about nursing, and her call to nursing came in an instant when she made a decision. Or I know I was called to Sudan about 20 years ago, sitting at the back of the church one evening service, and God laid Sudan on my heart. I know you all have your stories of calls, but I also know we have trouble, and today is all about the trouble and the compromises we make and the distrust we have and the moments when we try to fix it all ourselves, and we leave God aside. So today I'm briefly going to remind us about last week's conversation by Robin, his talk on the first part of Genesis 12. Really, this is a part 2. This is the second part of a two-part kind of preach, because the first part last week is the beginning. It was telling us about how Abram at this point was blessed and called. But with that comes the second part of Genesis 12, the reality, and God knows the reality, that even though we can feel so excited by the call, that we can say, "I will not be shaken," as we've just sung, that troubles come to shake us. But God knew that. And he had a plan, and he redeemed Abram. So that's what we will be talking about. We're looking at the trouble, looking at God's apparent silence in the trouble, which I suspect shook Abram even more. Then we'll be looking at Abram's response and the problems with that, the compromises he made, but then also how he returned to the blessing. So just very briefly to remind you, last week, Robin spoke about the first part of Genesis 12. He spoke about Abram's call. And God said to Abram, "Go, and I will bless you and make your name great. In you, all the families of the earth shall be blessed." It was a blessing for him, but it was a blessing for his family and for all the nations of the earth. But to do that, he had to go. He had to leave his land and his father's house and the people that he knew, the people of the nation he was born into. He had to go, but the blessings were big, and he went. He had faith. The start of Genesis 12 is that kind of exciting moment. Maybe, I don't know if you've ever been to New Wine or a big festival like that, where you feel so encouraged and overwhelmed by the call, and you are ready to go, and you are full of faith, and you do it, and you go. And we really see in that this is the beginning of the passage kind of outlined in a different way. So verses 1 and 2, God speaks, and he speaks clearly. "I will bless you and all the peoples." God is speaking, and Abram went. Then following on from that, he enters Canaan. And as he enters Canaan, he has a bit of a panic because he sees there are loads of Canaanites. He's probably thinking, "God, you told me to come here, but there are loads of people here already." But God speaks. "To your offspring I will give this land." And Abram continues to go. He goes on to the Negev. So the first part of Genesis 12 is full of that bold kind of blessing and faith in going. God speaks, Abram goes. God speaks, Abram goes. But in this second half of Genesis 12 that Don's kindly just read to us, we are hit straight on with troubling times. The middle of the passage, right in the middle, we meet famine. Famine, a severe famine, has come to the land. There are troubles, big troubles. So, as some of you might know, I work at the university, but I work in Sudan and South Sudan. I work on those countries, and particularly at the minute, I'm working on famine. I work on contemporary famines that are happening now, and not famines. My specialism isn't biblical famines, but I think we have something to learn about what Abram would be feeling if we think about famines at the moment in the world. Now, the first thing to say is obviously there should not be famines in the world. We have more than enough food, but there still are. I mean, these statistics might just seem overwhelming to you, like 24.99 million people on the edge of starvation. So the edge of famine, edge of starvation. There's technical categories to describe this. But basically, it means people are probably eating a meal a day, maybe one meal every 2 days. And then 0.25 million, so 250,000 people are in IPC5. They're in famine levels of hunger, which means they're probably eating a meal every 2 to 3 days, and there will be people dying of hunger. And that is the case in the world right now. About 2,000 people in Gaza are in that situation, 41,000 people in Yemen, 73,000 in South Sudan, and 140,000 in Sudan. This is really hungry. If you have children, you can't feed them every night. In famine times, you always feed at night. I do a lot of, I'm really privileged. I listen to a lot of stories about famine from people who have survived. And they'll always say they feed at night because it's really hard to go to sleep hungry. But in the famine levels of hunger, there will be some nights when you can't eat. And so it'll be the second day, you won't have food. And so lots of mothers tell this story of they will often put the pot on the fire as if they were cooking, knowing they don't have food. And they put stones in the pot in order that children will be deceived that there's something cooking, that maybe they'll get something to eat, because the children are complaining and they're hungry. The mother knows she has nothing, but they will let the pot boil until the children go to sleep. just so the children can get to sleep despite their hunger. It is a horrible reality, and it continues. So these are pictures from Sudan. Kate's been there. Kate Brankin, who's here, also works in the Sudan. She used to be a member of our church. She's still a close friend of our church. So these pictures, they were sent to me a couple of days ago by Manal, who's a close colleague of mine who is from this area. In the Sudan, as in everywhere, the famines are being caused by war, and so there is a war ongoing. They are burning the city I was in last year, Kauda, and people are fleeing to the mountains. They already had famine there in 2024. They had famine there in 2011, in the 90s and the 80s. The famines, sometimes they are caused by people blockading the city, not allowing armed groups, the government of Sudan blockading the city so people can't get inside and food can't get inside. But also sometimes the aerial attacks during planting season. So this is planting season in the Sudans in this kind of May time. But aerial planes will come over as if they're going to bomb. Whether they bomb or not, people have to hide inside and then they can't plant. So people end up incredibly hungry, and the war in the last few days means that people have had to flee from the fertile plain up to the hills. So this is in the Nuba Mountains. You can see the hills in the background. The hills are the safer place to be during times of war, but it's really hard to plant anything. It's like proper mountainous, rocky land, and so they are hungry, and they will be even more hungry in the year to come. And during times of famine, people do things they would never normally do. Some of these are just kind of disgusting, uncomfortable things. They're not necessarily immoral. So people will eat things they would never normally eat. So, for example, in the Greek famine in the 1940s, they ate loads of rubbish. People survived by going to bins and digging through the bins and eating rotting vegetables. In fact, some of the richer, proud people didn't survive because they didn't eat the rubbish. So survival sometimes involves humbling yourself. It always involves humbling yourself, I guess. The leather as well. So something that people do in the Sudans is they often have leather skins from their cattle. They'll use them for kind of blankets or mats. They rehydrate them during times of famine and then kind of chew them and try and eat them. It's really disgusting. But that maybe they can get some nutrients from these year-old like animal hides or decade-old animal hides. Maybe there's some nutrients left. People eat animal food, so in Darfur at the moment, we know it's a common thing that people have turned to eating animal food. At least, I mean, why not? In times that are so desperate. But also, sometimes people will break moral boundaries. So the image of the blanket there is because one old lady we spoke to from the Nuba Mountains was so horrified because her blanket and her food was stolen. And she was like, gosh, this is like, the end of all moral boundaries, that someone would steal from a very old, fragile lady. They're difficult times. And famine also undermines human worth, it undermines human dignity. I'd encourage everyone to read Primo Levi's account of starvation during the Holocaust. It's just awful, his kind of descriptions of the loss of humanity as that kind of physical change happens to your body during those times. But even a recent story in Juba just seems to sum it up for me. So Juba is the capital of South Sudan. In many ways, it shouldn't be as hungry as other places, but famine is never about the world having a lack of food. It's always about some people not being able to access it. And in Juba, there's a clinic there for malnourished children. It's meant to host 30 to 40 children. It currently has 70 children in it, so people are sharing beds, which is really problematic because it spreads illness very easily. But also one of the big issues is that people often come very late and there's nothing that can be done. So that clinic at the moment has 2 to 3 children dying a day. So these are all under 5s. They're mainly kind of 2 or 3 in age. But 2 to 3 children dying a day of 70 children is a lot. So we came across one mother who had come from the Nuba Mountains where these kind of previous pictures were. She'd fled to Juba trying to look for safety. But she had recently been married, she'd recently had her first baby, there was kind of happiness and hope initially, and that's why she wanted to flee to somewhere she thought was safer. But they didn't have access to food, they were in a strange land, they didn't have networks to support them, and they weren't able to feed the child well. And eventually they came to the nutrition clinic, but it was too late, and the child died within hours of arriving. But for me, the real horror of that even more is that the child had nowhere to be buried. The mother was beside herself, as was the father, actually, in that case. But they didn't know where to bury their child. They were just guests and they were strangers in the land. They were staying as a guest of someone from Juba. No one wanted a dead child in their compound, buried on their land. The public graves you have to have money for, and so there was nowhere to bury the child. And so their struggle for a day was to try and find a place to give dignity even in death to that young child. Famine is an awful thing that tests the very kind of nature of who we are, and it still happens. But for Abraham, it must have been tough as well. It was tough then too, and really tough, and the kind of test that would have made him really question what on earth God was doing. Because in times of famine, you want to be at home with the people you know and have networks with. But God had said to Abraham, leave your land and your father's house and your people. And in times of famine, what you need is your land and your father's house and your people. You need the land you know, because then you know what food you can eat. Food that you wouldn't normally eat, but you know which berries are poisonous, which ones are not poisonous, which grass might have some nutrients and others which don't. So in the Nuba Mountains, they have a root veg, a kind of sweet potato type thing. You have to wash it for 3 days to stop it being poisonous. And they eat it only in times of famine because it's so poisonous, but it's worth it. If it's the only food you have, you wash it for 3 days, like putting it in the pot, taking it out of the pot, scrubbing it, putting it in, taking it out. But people who have fled to the Nuba Mountains and then experience famine often don't know that. And so some have been poisoned because they didn't have the local knowledge. So Abraham was away from his own land. He was in Canaan. He wouldn't necessarily have known which foods to eat. It was dangerous to be away from your land in times of famine. And he was also away from his social networks. People survive by sharing. It's incredible what people are willing to share in the hardest of times. So in 1998 in South Sudan, there was a famine that killed about 70,000 people. And it confused aid agencies because they knew there wasn't much food there, but they were kind of, they didn't understand why people were surviving, and then suddenly they weren't. Mortality kind of almost fell off a cliff edge overnight, and lots of people died suddenly. And they realized the only reason it was happening is because everyone was sharing what they had. You share with your family and your friends. But Abraham was a foreigner in a land far away. He couldn't be sure of that. But what about us now? We do have food poverty in the UK. About 11% of people are in food poverty, according to a parliamentary report from last year. That's really high. But actually, for a lot of us sitting here, we know we're going to eat probably many times today and through the week. That's not our big fear, our big trouble. But there are things that would shake us, even if it's not famine. Maybe if we don't have enough of money, or we have issues with our jobs or our mortgages or our family or our health. Things where we would think, God, this can't have been what you were foreseeing. I need to fix it myself. I can't process that this is part of where you were taking me. I need to find my own solutions. And we have those troubles too. But I think for Abraham, another issue was God's silence. So at the first part of Genesis 12, God was speaking. He was speaking. He was sending Abraham. He said, go, and Abraham went. Abraham was nervous about the Canaanites. God said, no, I'm going to give you the land. Abraham continued going on to the Negev. There's famine, and then God is silent. In the most troublesome moments, we don't hear that God speaks. In fact, we see this moment of silence. And that's really hard. And I think it's something that many of us have experienced, that in the hard moments, God can seem silent and he can seem absent. So this is a reading from C.S. Lewis. And he is talking about that. He's recently lost his wife when he wrote this. And he says, when you are happy, if you remember yourself and turn to him, to God, with gratitude and praise, you will be, or so it feels, welcomed with open arms. But go to him when your need is desperate, when all other help is vain, and what do you find? A door slammed in your face, and sound of bolting and double bolting on the inside. After that silence, you may as well turn away. There are no lights in the window. This also comes through in the Bible. People talk about feeling that God is silent. Why, O Lord, do you stand far off? Why do you hide yourself in times of trouble? And I know actually some of us hear God very well in times of trouble. Like I know Kate, who goes to Sudan, sometimes she's in incredible trouble and God talks really loudly. And that's great. And sometimes I think I need times of trouble to make me listen to God properly. And then I hear him. But that's not always the case. Abram felt this moment of silence. And I think it does prompt us to say, why, God? Like, why? This famine came. Why not tell Abram what to do? And this passage doesn't really give us the answers, but there are reasons why. I think sometimes we're just not listening. We're so panicked by the moment. We're so thinking, gosh, this trouble is way too big. How am I going to fix it? There's no space in our panic to hear God. It's like we've got kind of headphones in. God might be talking really, really loudly, but we're just not listening. But I don't think that's always the case. Some of you, I'm sure, are able to listen to God even in the troubles. But maybe sometimes God chooses to be silent, present, very present, but silent. And sometimes maybe it's only later that we realize that surely the Lord is in this place, even if I was never aware of it. That comes later in Genesis in relation to Jacob. But that sense that sometimes God is there even when we don't know he's there, even when we forget, even when we don't hear him. And maybe there's something of this as well, that what matters is not that he speaks, but that he has spoken. Abram had been given a clear path. God had told him what to do, and he didn't say, only do this if everything is well. God would have known the famine would have come, and so maybe he didn't need to speak. There was already a plan. But Abram chose a kind of self-directed course. He compromised, and he went to Egypt. He didn't wait for God to speak. Maybe God would have spoken, but he set off to Egypt, to a safe place to be. And Egypt was, in his mind, a safe place to be because it had irrigated flood systems. It was a place to go in times of famine. So irrigated water. So Egypt is often, in biblical times, the place people go in times of famine because unlike the rain-fed farms of Canaan, Egypt relied on the Nile. So when Canaan didn't have food, maybe Egypt would have food. It was also a time of political stability in Egypt, so a nice, calm place to be. There'd been 180 years of the same family in charge, not very democratic, but very peaceful. And they were also welcoming strangers at the time and people from the kind of people of Abram. So in human eyes, it seemed a good place to be. But Abram hadn't waited for God's call. So if we look back at Genesis 12, you see that rhythm, right? So at the very beginning, God speaks, go, and Abram went. God again says, keep going, this is the land. Abram goes. Then there's the famine. Then the next person we hear speaking in this passage isn't God, but it's Abram himself. He takes over as the director and the voice. So he speaks. But what he speaks is to allow his wife, Sarah, to be taken to Pharaoh's house. He says, say you are my sister. Don't tell people you're my wife. He doesn't stand up and protect his wife, but instead he allows her to be taken to Pharaoh's house. And Sarah went. And this has consequences. It has consequences for his family. But also that compromise, that distrust, has consequences for his call. Verse 3, Abram had been promised that, and in all people on earth will be blessed through you. Now in verse 17, but the Lord inflicted serious disease on Pharaoh and the household because of Abram's wife Sarah. He was called into a blessing to be a blessing, and he's feared and he's tried to fix it himself. And now he is a curse on the nation, a curse on the house of Pharaoh. He has brought curse upon them. He has done exactly the opposite of what God was hoping he would do. And I do this. I make compromises all the time. Kate is visiting the church today. I didn't realize she was coming until a couple of days ago. Me and Kate both work in Sudan, and Kate always reminds me whenever I see her of the compromises I make, because sometimes I have just had enough of mosquitoes. There's so many mosquitoes in South Sudan. There's also snakes, there's scorpions, and I have had enough. And nylon bed sheets, which are just so uncomfortable. And I choose to stay in a nice hotel, and Kate never does. She is unflinchingly uncompromising in the places she is willing to stay. But Kate also works a lot with the church there and reminds me of the incredible things the church does there without compromise. So Kate's briefly going to share an example, I think, of the church being uncompromised in the Sudans, even though they also face famine and starvation. This is Kate Brankin.
Hello. Can I first of all just say it's lovely to be back with you. This was my home church for over 30 years, until we moved to Hereford 4 years ago. So it's always a blessing when we come back. We normally visit and just come for the 9 o'clock, but I persuaded Steve to stay for this one too. And as Naomi said, this was not planned.
Literally planned a minute before I started talking.
So she has talked about lots of statistics about the famine, and behind all of the statistics there are real people. I was in Nuba Mountains last November, and we had gone to lead some conferences with the youth and the women. And we got there and they said, "But what are you doing here now? This is our harvest season. We want to be in the fields harvesting." And we said, "Your bishop invited us now, that's why we're here." So we got around that, and they came for their 3 days in each archdeaconry. But there was very much, they wanted to be harvesting because they needed that food for the rest of the year. And so being displaced from their home and having to uproot is difficult for them. And the bishop was saying to us, we need to build the people. We don't need buildings, we need to build the people, because they will get displaced. A bomb will come and destroy the buildings, or fighting will destroy. So it's all about the people. And 4 years ago, 4 or 5 years ago now, I set up a small charity called Keep in Step International, which is the reason I am still able to go to South Sudan. So I've been going there for about 16 years now. And we just sang about, "I will build my life upon your love, it is a firm foundation." So that's what I try to do. I take small teams of South Sudanese or Sudanese people to give the people in these difficult places a firm foundation in God. Church isn't just about, the music was good, we did some good singing. It's about the relationship with Jesus, so that when they have famine, when they have to run, they are in a stronger position and they will look to him and trust him. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's perfect. Thanks, Kate.
Thank you.
So there's actually a picture. Thank you, Kate. Yeah, Kate's work is amazing, but that actually made, Abram didn't get it right. There is so much grace when we get it wrong, but actually to be able to stay strong in faith. So this is a picture from a couple of days ago, actually, with Pastor Vicar from the Nuba Mountains leading his people up the hills. They're going to get out of the valley where the conflict is worse. They're going up to the hills. This is difficult times. They're missing cultivation. They'll be at the end of their food supplies. But he will be there to try and keep them faithful when Abram failed. But when we fail, it's not the end of the story, right? We know that with Abram's story, it kept going. God redeemed the situation despite his compromises, despite Abram trying to fix it all, that God managed to redeem the call. So the last speech we hear in Genesis 12 is Pharaoh at the very end saying to Abram, "Go." Go, and Abram left and went back to Canaan. So Pharaoh wanted him to go because Abram had brought a curse on his house. He'd deceived him, he'd confused him, he'd brought bad things. Pharaoh knew he wanted him out of there. And this was not an easy, nice way to go. Initially, when Abraham enters Canaan earlier on in Genesis 12, there's a sense of celebration of him being faithful, him doing what God wanted. He is led out of Egypt with an armed guard, sent by Pharaoh away. This isn't a going of confidence, this is a going back of disgrace in a way. But God puts him back in Canaan through Pharaoh. But he doesn't stop there. He has promised to Abram what he will do, and he remains faithful even when Abram wasn't. He goes on to promise that he again will have as many children and descendants as the stars in the sky. He gives him the land of Canaan and his children the land of Canaan. Those promises are fulfilled even though Abram left. But also the blessings to the nations. Over time, God will bless Egypt, not perfectly and completely yet, one day. But even in Genesis, we have the story of Joseph in a time of famine being sent to Egypt, being forcibly sent to Egypt. But there he blesses Egypt. He fills their grain stores because he knows what's coming, and he saves Egypt itself from famine. So though Abram failed to be a blessing, his descendant will be a blessing. And there are other relationships that God's people have with Egypt over time, even that Jesus himself would come out of Egypt and that the church would eventually be built in Egypt because Jesus would say, go and make disciples of all nations. And not just Egypt, the world. God had a mission and he didn't give up on it. Because in the end, he had to send his son. Because Abram, like all of those other characters in the Old Testament, and like us, kept getting it wrong. So then the owner of the vineyard said, what should I do? I will send my own son whom I love. That even though we get it wrong, he will restore us to our call. And he was so eager to do that he would even send Jesus to lead us to the nations and to allow us to continue the blessing God had promised us. So as we finish, I just want us to think about these questions, and we'll think about it with some music in the background, some music from Teze. So I know you have been called. I know God has blessed you and called you because you are the people of God. But I ask you, what troubles and silences have challenged your trust in God's blessing and call? What blessing and call do you need to hear God reaffirming?